So look, I'm Malcolm Crompton, and I'm probably the least qualified medical researcher here, so this is a bit of a worry, but I will try and take you on perhaps a journey that some of you have been on and others haven't. That's me. I don't know why Melanie put that slide up there. My bio's in the booklet if you want to read it. I've been around a long time. The power of patterns in big data. I'm more going to address that second point, how and when can data be repurposed. The reason for wanting to talk about that is that I'm hearing this already today. This is not a problem. Trust me, I'm a researcher. This is not a problem. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Ethics, I'm ethical. I've got a good framework. I've been trained through my medical degree and all the subsequent research processes so far. After that, there's the health research ethics committees. Everything's job done. Trust me, I'm a researcher. One of the points that I would make about this is this. I think the real question is, do you have a social licence to do your work? And everything that we've heard so far is a contributor to that social licence. But I do think that you may need to give some thoughts to when do you really have a social licence to do what you're doing. And I just want to put on the table a couple of thoughts about that before we go any further. And in fact, the other question is, how do you earn your social licence? Social licence is actually a relatively recent term of art. It's not been around for a very, very long time. It's worthwhile doing a bit of reading on it, a bit of thinking about it, and re-immersing yourself into the wider society in which you live. The Australian statistician, by the way, David Kalish, has actually, in reasonably simple terms, said you've got your social licence if you can basically balance this equation, which is that you've got your social licence if you've got proven value and you've got high security. Now, that's Malcolm being a bit cheeky about a fairly lengthy speech that David gave, but if you actually want to see what he actually said, all you've got to do is to click here on that link and read it for yourself. Now, I'm hoping that we're going to publish these PowerPoints somewhere so that you can look them up, and we'll do it in a format where the links actually work rather than they're just blue links that stare at you in one click. We got tricks. May I suggest to you that I have just described a classic mathematical statement of a necessary but not sufficient solution? Because I think the answer is no. One of the real things that I haven't heard anything about yet, except it was coming through in some of those talks, is the use of the results that you've come up with. And for example, in the colorectal work that we've just heard about, use or translation, whichever word you want to use, was being specifically addressed, and some very sort of hard to argue with uses coming out of all of that. But data is exactly the same as a gun. And remember the National Rifle Association's mantra, absolute mantra in the USA. It's not guns that kill people, it's people with guns that kill people. Therefore, the NRA has no responsibility whatsoever for the fact that more people are killed by mass shootings in the USA than just about anywhere else in the world, other than when you're actually in a war zone. Not a problem for the NRA. I'd suggest that that's simply insufficient. There will be social uses of some of your answers that you did not predict, did not think about, and could be quite unsettling, and in fact even reduce the health of Australians. The one that was being argued quite recently in the newspapers is a little piece of work that came out of one of the Sydney universities that was saying if we do excessive genomic testing on individuals and we let that data get into the wrong hands, and there is a fear that that will be used by the insurance companies to either pro-select or anti-select, we will actually adversely affect the health of Australians because they will not turn up for the genetic tests or whatever. I'm not asking you to say whether that's a credible scenario or not. The scenario takes hold in the minds of the people of Australia. The facts don't matter. Perception is reality on these things. So you have an issue with the data and the results that you're producing way beyond further clinical use of the results that you've got. It will happen. And I'd suggest there's at least 4 words, and probably more, whose use I have not heard of yet today. And they are words like dignity, respect, autonomy, a big brother approach to our society. There's two groups of people who've not really talked about in this room except in an extreme abstract. The research subject and every single one of the 23 million people who live in this country, let alone the 7 billion around the planet. They're all affected one way or another by what you do if you actually come up with something useful. Have we thought about how they're going to lead their lives through all of this with a sense of dignity, a sense of respect, a sense of autonomy, and when should Big Brother intervene and when not? One of the great things about being human is the ability to make mistakes and to learn from them. We can't just herd the cats. So let me give some thought to this. I'd have to say that wider society must be involved in the decisions on the use of the data, and that you have a role in that discussion. You have a huge advantage, which is that you know your data very well. You know much better than anybody else in the country how you can use it in the immediate analysis. You may actually have I won't use the word deficiency, but a need to gain more strength in the business of how do other Australians see this. You need to engage. And I'd have to say that you're going to engage when you do this in a discussion that is not always rational. Welcome to the world, folks. And let me give you a few little examples. In this country, for whatever reason, we're still allowed to smoke cigarettes, even though we've got an absolute proof that it kills. You smoke, you die. Simple. In fact, it's a money-saving venture. Not only does smoking raise money for the federal budget, but it kills off a whole lot of people we don't have to look after in old age. It's a fantastic budget initiative to encourage people to smoke. But we still let them do it. But we don't ban marijuana and a whole bunch, we have banned marijuana and a whole lot of other drugs. Is that a rational state of affairs for this country? I'm not asking you to answer the question, I'm just saying, start thinking. We spend so much money on complementary medicines where the NHMRC has said there is no proven value in this stuff. We spend the same amount of money on complementary medicines as we spend on prescription medicines. That's just fine, but hey, why don't we redirect that expenditure into some of the other wonderful projects that are going on? On the other hand, decisions do get taken eventually, quite what many people in this room would consider to be quite rational. The emergence of codeine addiction and other addictions has a real issue in our society, and in some parts of the USA it's got to very extreme proportions. We're doing something about it. We're actually going to make it harder to get hold of these things starting next year in terms of what you've got to do over the counter at the chemist and prescriptions and so forth. Here's a decision that we took, is it 20 years ago or 15 years ago, about you can't send your kids to school anymore unless they've got a full card, an immunisation card. Now, I'm not going into the anti-vax debate. I'm terrified by the fact that so much crap misinformation can be used to so much effect to hurt so many young kids. That's not my point. My point is that society has decided to big brother who can go to school. Most of us in the room would think that's a pretty good idea. A lot of sort of public health, economic externality gains in there as well as the kid actually being alive. But it's a social decision. These decisions aren't necessarily consistent with each other or consistent with even some of the values that you would hold in this room. My point is society over time takes these decisions and you need to be part of the decision-making process. Where next with all the data that you're producing? Because when you read up on the concept of big data and the big data analytics that can be put down on that, and then the artificial intelligence use that can be made of all of those results, you have some seriously interesting futures in front of you, in front of me, in front of our children. We need to contribute to how those decisions are made, or we will be automatons being run by Big Brother through AI machines that actually don't even use a language we can understand. AI machines are already developing their own languages for communicating with each other that humans haven't yet understood. This is our future if we let it happen. I'm not saying don't let it happen, there's going to be some fabulous results come, but just because you can, should you, still remains a huge question that we're not addressing. I would suggest there's a lot of work for everybody in this room to do beyond anything I've heard discussed this morning. Simple as that. What I'm going to actually do is to then take the conversation as it has been held over the last 50 years, century, even thousands of years, on what we can do with personal information. Because we've already thought about it and made decisions as a society through our elected representatives, through our professional societies and so forth. We have law, the Privacy Act and other Commonwealth law and state and territory law, including health-specific legislation on how you can use personal information. We have health information spelled out in various parts of particularly the federal legislation, which I've listed here. There are going to be some people in this room who can recite those sections of the legislation, the Statement on Human Experimentation, and all the AHEC guidance off by heart. So I'm not trying to teach you to suck kids. I'm just saying, reminder call here, guys. Society has already taken some decisions on what you can do and can't do with data about people. Almost certainly there's at least one person in this room who's champing in the bit and saying, let's go back to that second slide and say, trust me, I'm a researcher, can't I just get along with it? The answer so far is no. You haven't made your case. There's some social decisions to be made here. What I'm going to do next, though, is to say, given that we've been given a framework right now, can we maximise in a way that is acceptable to the people of Australia the use of the information that we've got in front of us? There's a few clues there. And I therefore have to start with the definition of what is personal information if I move into the arena of what is not personal information. And so let's read the Act for a moment. Personal information means information or opinion about an identified individual or an individual who is reasonably identifiable. Whether the information or opinion is true or not, note, it includes opinion, and truth doesn't matter. And whether the information or opinion is recorded, oops, even the I've got a spelling error in there, sorry about that, in a material form or not. It's pretty easy, really. Now, I'll give you a couple of thoughts. Whenever anybody turns up from the USA to sell you kit and they start using the words personally identifiable information, alarm bells should ring in your mind. That is a significantly narrower concept than the definition in the Australian law of what personal information is. Don't buy their kit until you have rerun your analytical processing against the Australian legal framework to find out if the stuff that they said is not personally identifiable information is or is not personal information under Australian law. Quite often in America, personally identifiable information is literally a list of defined fields, age, name, address, and a few other things like that. The rest is not, which is why all those advertising companies can gather so much information about you and play with it and sell it many times over around the world because they're just saying it's not personal information. The second thing is we actually have a definition of health information. Health information is a subset of personal information in the privacy law. Nothing that is health information is not personal information, but not all personal information is health information. And that's the definition. It's pretty broad, is really what that's telling you. I won't go into that anymore. But what about this? What does all that mean when it comes to actually trying to deal with a de-identified data set? So what I'm going to do now is just wander through, can we make some better use of this business of de-identification? Because there has been some recent legal guidance on this that's left nobody happy. How many people have heard of a recent federal court case, full bench, Privacy Commissioner versus Telstra Corporation Limited, involving most particularly a former journalist called Ben Grubb? We have one person? We have a few people. So some people have heard about it and some people haven't. The only thing I can tell you about that is 99.99% of the guidance you've heard on what that court case means is wrong. Because for most people, they've got the one sentence exec summary that says, this decision has decided that metadata is not personal information. That is not true. First of all, some metadata has been defined in law as personal information, whether you like it or not, and that's the metadata retention legislation that's been put down on the tailgate. But this is what has actually come out of, in the still term, from that ruling, and from the two prior cases before it, which was the Privacy Commissioner made a determination as to what he thought. That was appealed to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and that was appealed to the Federal Court. Now, if you want some light reading and amusement, you read the AAT decision. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a research chemist and an economist. God knows why I became Privacy Commissioner. That is a joke. It's a very, very poor decision, and no wonder it was appealed. Now, the Privacy Commissioner didn't get what he wanted in his appeal to the Federal Court, but he got some clarity that was not being given by the AAT. So, unfortunately, the first dot point still counts. It requires an evaluative conclusion depending on the facts of an individual case, clear as mud. What that's saying is, guys, you've got to work in the circumstance. You can't get too far ahead of yourselves. Information has to be in some way concerning or connected with the individual. Is an insufficient test for whether information is about an individual, even if it might be personal information. In that instance, essentially the argument ran in simple terms like this. Ben Grubb wanted access to the metadata held by Telstra about him. The court case essentially said Ben Grubb's device, its interaction with the first cell tower, almost certainly was personal information, but the interaction between that first cell tower and the second cell tower was too remotely disconnected from Ben Grubb for it to be about Ben Grubb, even if it was personal information. So, go back to first dot point, you've got to evaluate it in the circumstances. It remains unclear how close the connection has to be in order to pass the evaluative test, so in a sense the Federal Court said first cell tower to second cell tower too remote. It said the first leg of it was sufficiently close, but it didn't draw the line in between. At least we've got some boundaries. This is very important, very important. Even if a single piece of information is not about the individual, it may be about the individual when combined with other information. We now have some court cases that confirm that for us. And the last one is very important because the AAT simply got this wrong. But basically it said, if this information is about the car that Mrs. Kafoops drives, it can't be about the person. The Federal Court said that's rubbish, it can be about both. That's the only guidance we have from the courts on the meaning of that definition of personal information. All right, so let's get right ahead of ourselves now, because how many people have come across the Data 61 CSIRO booklet? Again, a couple of hands raised. By the end of tomorrow night, all of you should have clicked on the link that's underneath that picture, or the link under the word released, and at least drawn it down onto your devices, if not gone and got a copy. It's derived from the UK Anonymisation Decision-Making Framework document, which is a sparkler. In amongst all of this stuff that's been around on de-identification, Clarity emerged when UCAN came out with their version of it. And the rework that's been done here by the Data 61 CSIRO, I think, is possibly even a further step ahead. The UCAN document has to delve into much more of the, almost the philosophy of what the hell are we doing here, in order to get to some conclusions. With this other document in Australia is a bit more crystallised from that. Both are well worth reading, but Data 61 OAIC is essentially the shorter, more practical version, if you want it. Christine O'Keefe, who's here at the ANU, was involved in both of those projects. I think she's one of the national treasures. So, the framework in more detail, which I will not go through in very much detail now because there's really quite a lot in that book, but the beauty of those two documents is that they are actually practical. You can actually work out whether you're doing stuff or not, rather than just reading more fluff. And it sets out a 10-step process. You really need to know what the heck you're doing and the circumstances in which you're doing it. You've got to describe your data situation, understand your legal obligations, know your data, understand the use case for the data, and meet your ethical obligations. And again, the document then unpacks that in some detail for you with some suggestions. That's the data situation audit. having got a grip on what's going on, and by the way, even in there, that document is making quite a point of engage your stakeholders. Do people, not just the further researchers or even the departments of health, need to know this, and what are they going to do with it? Does the wider population of Australia think that might be appropriate? You've got a very influential role to play in some of those decisions if you want to do it. Having done all of that, you then need to think about your disclosure risk. One of the points that was being made during the presentations earlier today was some control environments are already being set up. Some quite good controller environments are already being set up. I would suggest though that even those control environments are inputs to the decisions that you need to make here using this framework. They don't solve your problem, they help you solve your problem. And one of the classic examples, and that really kicked this off, a year ago, was when the Department of Health merrily released something that said, here is 10% of the Medicare data over the last quite long period of time. It's been de-identified, pass the gut, see what you can do with it. I was in a board meeting where a couple of medical researchers said, it's only just been released, it's been out for 10 minutes, we've already downloaded the full data set because we know it's going to be locked up again. So by the time we got to the end of that day, I think that full data set had been downloaded at least 50 times. So poor old Department of Health, it's run away from it. The point was, a person at Monash University only took 2 weeks to say, this is how I'm beginning to get personal information to emerge out of that data set. The problem was, the Department of Health went and saw its lawyers, and lawyers said, as far as we can tell, it's not personal information because it passed a set of legal tests. Nobody went to the techies or the researchers and said, what could you do with this data set if we give it to you? And the point about that was they released data into the wild. There are 7 billion on this planet, billion people on this planet who are now welcome to have a go at that data set. It's very, very different from, say, an accredited person or a person who's under contract or a person who's in a particular room who's only able to ask the data set 10 questions in a particular way, or they get bounced out if they attack the data too repeatedly, trying to pull unit level data out that they shouldn't be pulling out. The Department of Health just said, bust a gut. Not a good governance model. So I would suggest to you that if you read that framework, you're going to find you can do more with personal information or de-identified information than you thought, so long as you do it right, and that framework gives you a great deal of guidance. And the really important thing about the Australian version is the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner was part of the process of writing that document. It's got some authority. Looks like I'm getting a wave, is that right? Yeah, okay. I'm just letting you know I saw you. So if you want one phrase that comes out of that document that was being made already this morning by the other speakers, context matters. And this helps you think through the context. Until the UCAN document came out, context was just simply not being thought about enough, I don't think, in the debate. And addressing both the data and the context will give you an answer. So here's a few thoughts for what I would suggest you walk out of the room and think about. First of all, rework how you read the Privacy Act. There was a thing in the 2008 review of the Privacy Act by the Australian Law Reform Commission, which is just beautiful. It's BOPA. Blame it on the Privacy Act. And as we heard, data custodians are a bit reluctant to let the information out. Be very careful of BOPA, because BOPA is actually swinging both ways. There's an awful lot of can't, won't, because it's in the Privacy Act, when people haven't gone back to the words. And on other occasions, there's an awful lot of, if I close my eyes, nobody will turn up and pull me into line. So I go back to what the Act is actually saying. Use that new de-identification framework to your advantage. You will find there are more degrees of freedom in there than you thought, so long as you get it right. And the help that you've been offered by the previous speakers on this is really a fabulous start. I would suggest even there, one of the things missing though is genuine third-party assurance processes. And by third-party assurance processes, I don't just mean the ethical hackers and make sure it's secure. Security is your concrete foundations with the reinforced in there. That's all. It's not a building. You've got to do the rest before you know whether your information is being properly governed and controlled. Most importantly, I would suggest you review your social licence on what you're doing and why through the lens of what others think. And you have to go beyond the babies will die if you don't let me do this research kind of argument. That's the national security argument. It's national security, therefore we'll do anything. The same thing, babies will die, therefore we can do anything. No, it's a much more nuanced discussion than that. Get out there and make the case. That's the last point that I would suggest to you. What are the benefits? Yes, that's the bit that David Kalish wants to talk about. What your results should and should not be used for. Describe the boundaries. And remember, as you do that discussion, words like dignity, respect, freedom of choice, big brother, the society that we want to live in, which isn't just run by other people telling me what to do or other people telling you what to do because they've done the research. Only a subset. That's all, folks. Have we got any questions before we have a cup of coffee? Yes, ma'am.
How did you start the latest data of breaches and amendments? I don't see much discussion about how that might impact on research and portfolio of the identified or longitudinal data, etc.
Yeah, really good question. If you look at the 10 steps that I put out, prepare for a data breach is one of the steps in anticipation of that law change. And the other thing at the bottom of those 10 steps is assume it's going to go wrong. The probability of failure is actually 1. It's a 1.0 certainty. You don't know how many rolls of the dice it's going to take before one of those adverse events happens. But so much of what I watch around me, whether it's in not less so a lab, but in the world around me, is plan for success. This is how we're going to get things right. Nobody stops and thinks about what's the experience when things go wrong. Do we have a drill? Who's the nominated person who's going to take control here? Do we know what the phone numbers are? You know, there's a myriad of things to think through about when things go wrong that can be thought through and practiced before they go wrong. So, to go back to your question, the law comes into effect in February that actually makes certain, not all, but certain data breaches notifiable. You will find that the Privacy Commissioner is extremely cooperative if you want to cooperate. The Privacy Commissioner takes a very classic iron fist and a velvet glove approach. If you go to the Commissioner, say you've got a problem, say what you're doing about it, the Commissioner will help you solve your problem. If you go into denial and it's lawyers at 10 paces, good luck to you. So that's the first thing to do. So you probably need to get, if you want to, some actual formal advice. You want to think about structures in your own organisation. You want to make sure you're at least reasonably familiar with the law, which is much less of a problem than you think, because the old language was real risk of serious harm, and I can never recite quite the new words, but so it's all about a level of probability and a level of harm, so classic risk management binary. And you will find with your de-identified data sets, if it's been well de-identified and you've got some evidence as to why it was well de-identified, and that, really I didn't expect that to happen, you're in a much better position than if you were saying, well, just look off the names and addresses. You're not going to pass the exam if all you did is take off the names